900 blocks of Pale Garden, ancient cities under Pale Garden, and many more inside these 9 Pale Garden seeds you're going to want to use for your survival world. Starting off with this seed, and when you're looking for a Pale Garden seed, you're not just looking for a Pale Garden inside a seed, you want to have a somewhat amount of variety around the Pale Garden, and fortunately enough, at least around spawn, there is a fair amount of variety in terms of biomes, because not only do we have the Pale Garden here, we also have some mountains, we have some dark oak forests, we have some huge old growth pine taiga biomes, we have that biome whose name is escaping me. Grove, we have a grove biome. Got some forests, some rivers, some taigas. We have a fair amount of biomes you might expect to see just sitting right around the Pale Garden, with 1 or 2 interesting bits of generation around here too. And the Pale Garden on its own is actually a pretty decently sized one of that. It's not like a huge one, but overall, in the case you want to make the most out of like a Pale Garden, then this seed pretty much has you covered, as well as having you covered with a whole bunch of other different types of biomes surrounding it, including a birch forest, including a jungle, including some stony shores, and I believe just a little bit further this way, a savanna biome right over here too. So yeah, right surrounding this entire Pale Garden is pretty much everything you're going to want to expect and want when starting inside of a seed. But this seed has something you never knew you wanted, but I'm so glad that you have, because your spawn is located literally about 200 blocks up. You know, nothing too serious, but something that is serious is the fact that if we had about 300 blocks off in one direction and then 500 blocks off in the other direction for a little bit, then what we're eventually going to find is not only a Pale Garden, but right in the middle of this Pale Garden is actually a pillager outpost. Yeah, I'm not even joking. Like, pretty much right dab in the middle of this thing is a pillager outpost, smack dab right in the middle of all the creaking of everything else like that you can find inside of here. And this is just a sight to behold. Like, finding things like this is not unexpected, but it's still really cool to see. And it's really cool to see how even certain places of this generation kind of doesn't necessarily work that well together, as we can see right here. You got lucky, Golem. You got lucky. You should be so grateful for this. There's 1 or 2 little things around the place that does break alongside the Pale Garden. But yeah, if you thought the creaking wasn't hard enough, then I guess this seed in the middle of the night alongside every single other different type of mob and things like that might make this this seed and this biome just a little bit more difficult. But something that's not going to be quite as difficult is the Pale Garden you'll find inside this seed, because around about 400 blocks in this direction and about 300 blocks in this direction, we're going to find probably the biggest Pale Garden, at least in terms of mass. Maybe not in terms of, like, say, scale or length or anything like that, but in the case you are measuring it by, like, the amount of mass you find it, then this one is probably going to be around the biggest. And no, I'm not talking about that one. I'm instead talking about this one we can see right here, because it is a pretty long one, but not quite the longest one we've ever seen. But it also is a pretty wide one, as we can see right here, because not only does it start from the very edge it can, it also goes on for not as far as it could go, but very, very, very far. And you saw pretty much where we started, and the very end of this is literally all the way over here. And again, not the longest one we've ever seen, but for how big it actually is, probably does make it, at least in terms of mass, the biggest one we've ever found, and the biggest one we've ever found with another little structure we found inside of here, or at least on the very edge of one side of here, because yeah, we got this ruined portal right here with literally everything you're ever gonna need with handling a creaking. I promise. And something else you're gonna have to fight is the fact that there's actually a little bit of dark oak forest sitting literally in the middle of this huge pale oak forest. So I don't know, maybe a base camp, maybe something else? I don't know, just throwing out ideas. There's a lot of possibilities and a lot of options you could do with the Pale Garden of this size. But if you want a huge Pale Garden you literally spawn inside of, then just use this seed we can see right here. Because when we log into the world, we are immediately going to be straight inside of a pretty decent sized Pale Garden. Maybe not as big as the one we saw in the last seed, but in the case you still want a really, really big Pale Garden, then this seed pretty much has you covered in the case you want one right at spawn. Because we have all this Pale Garden going all the way off in this direction over here. We have a whole bunch of Pale Garden going off in this direction over here. And with plenty and plenty of exit points pretty much right next to each other as you head across this one biome. With, yet again, I didn't even realize this was a thing, but the second seed in a row with the ruined portal right inside of Pale Garden. And the very end of it is literally just right over here, just passing some very prestigious and very obvious drops to certain death. You will eventually end yourself at the very end of the Pale Garden. So overall, this Pale Garden seed's pretty interesting, just mildly precarious in certain places. This is not gonna end well. I'm just calling it right now. This is not gonna end well. Something that might end just a little bit better is this next seed, because once again we spawn not inside of a pill garden, but literally right next to it. And it's interesting not only because this is also a pretty decent sized one, but also because underneath this pill garden is actually an ancient city. Kinda hard to believe that, but if we actually pop ourselves into spectator mode for a second, then we can see that because this is technically on a hill, that does mean that things like ancient cities can generate underneath biomes like these, because if we hit ourselves literally right below here, then we're eventually going to see literally an ancient city. Literally just right there. So in case you want to make the most of pill gardens and pill garden ancient cities for whatever reason, then this seed might have you covered in that sense. It also might have you covered in the case you want to have more interesting types of generation and lakes inside a pill garden, such as this one we can see right here. But if for whatever reason an ancient city inside the pill garden wasn't enough for you, then maybe this seed might fill that bill, because right underneath this pill garden we can see right here, if we just pop ourselves back into spectator, then we're going to notice the fact that there is a trial chambers literally right below it. So that's one sense taken care of, literally right at spawn, though it is mildly more inside the Dark Oak Forest than it is inside the Pill Garden. But it is still linked onto the Pill Garden in some sense, considering it is literally right at spawn. Also considering there's literally a woodland mansion that's right on the edge of generating right inside of the Pill Garden. Pill Gardens actually prevent woodland mansions from generating inside of the biome, at least on Bedrock Edition, but this is probably going to be the closest you'll be able to find a woodland mansion generating inside of a Pill Garden, because we do have a marginal amount of it inside of it. Probably, again, the most we're probably going to find for any seed in a while. Also, considering Pill Gardens are pretty raised up in terms of other biomes, that means getting on the roof and actually jumping from the top down to get yourself some of the loot from some of these chests is made that much more easy now. Like, look at this. From the Pill Garden to the roof, we could pop ourselves one block in and we are literally inside of the boxing arena. With, sure, a skeleton in there, but also with all the loot you could find inside here, including some resin clumps that I didn't even know was a thing until literally this recording. That is wild. That is insane. I just checked another one of these hallway chests and there's more resin clumps. I don't know how well known that is, but in the case that's not very well known, then I guess woodland mansions are another way of getting resin clumps now. And speaking of finding things in multiple places, this seed actually has multiple Pill Gardens inside one huge Dark Oak Forest, because if we just head off in this direction for just a little bit, past these old growth pine taigas, and we're eventually going to find our Dark Oak Forest, which is big enough to actually house multiple Pill Gardens all across it. We have this one we can see right here. We have that one right over there. If we head off in this direction for a little bit, we're going to find many more around here. Some smaller than others, as we could see. And some larger than others, as we could see too. But yeah, I guess if you're going to have a really big biome, you might as well splice it up with some sub-biomes like Pill Gardens all across it too. Just makes the journey a little bit less repetitive and going through this huge, massive, huge biome. Just like how when Bamboo Forest Reddit, making that journey through Jungle Forest was made just a little bit more interesting then. And the same can be said with all these Pill Oak Forests across this entire massive Dark Oak Forest. But if you want that journey to be almost nothing but Pill Gardens, then this seed pretty much has you covered, because if we just head off a couple hundred blocks off in this direction, past this normal forest, past this birch forest, then we're eventually going to find what could quite possibly be the longest Pill Garden we have found so far, stretching at just under 900 blocks long, because right now we're at around about 42, 45 or something like that. But if we head off in this direction for an incredibly long time, that we're eventually going to see is that this Pill Garden goes on for an incredibly long time. Just under 900 blocks, as we can see. We're at around about 928, 930, yeah, just about 15-ish blocks away from being 900 blocks of nothing but Pill Garden stretching across this entire stretch. If you really wanted the experience of being inside a Pill Garden and not running out of that experience, then this seed undoubtedly is the seed for you, considering just how much Pill Garden you're gonna have to go through to go from one side to the other. But again, it's still like relatively thin, meaning you can still find your way out of it relatively easily, but considering how thick it is for how long it is too, this is just an insane feat to behold, and an insane journey to behold, especially overnight, dealing with all the creaking you're gonna have to deal with, dealing with all the other different types of mobs you're gonna have to deal with. This biome, 100% inside this seed, is gonna be the challenge to beat. And speaking of defeating things, the mobs inside of this seed are gonna have quite the battle and quite the difficulty of surviving, because if we head off about 1,300 blocks in this direction. Yeah, this is probably going to be the longest trek you're going to have to do for any of these Pale Garden seeds, but if you do happen to head off about 1,300-ish blocks off in this direction, then what we're going to eventually be able to find is another fairly decently sized Pale Garden, but what we're going to actually find at the edge of it off in this direction is, yeah, a village, literally skewing on the side of this Pale Garden, meaning at night, these villagers are going to have quite the challenge to behold. Or, in the case you are looking to take on a Pale Garden, this might be a great base of operations for you to take place in. Whether it be to hide from the creaking, whether it be just to gear up with all the loot and all the food and stuff you can find inside the village, or whether just to defend the villagers from all the creakings and stuff. Whatever you decide to do, this has been 9 Pale Garden seeds you're going to want to use for the Garden's Awakens update. And with that, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all later.